Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MonoBlueTron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. Today's episode comes with an announcement. I'm doing an AMA on Reddit right now. Yes, this second. Come on over to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Subreddit and ask me if I control the world's oil supply. In the meantime, though, we're going to take a look at an archetype that hasn't received the attention it's deserved since 2015. I'm speaking, as you may have guessed, about Cosmo. So here's the list, and yikes, that's a lot of one-ofs. As always, I'll give you a little bit of background about the archetype, a little bit of a discussion about what I hope the deck can do, and as always, the card by card. So firstly, for those of you that don't know, Cosmo used to be the scariest thing on two legs, and occasionally four wheels. I don't really know what's going on in Tin Can's art. A combination of Star Wars and the Wizard of Oz, it made a splash in 2015, both as pure variants, Fire King Island builds, and the occasional Demise deck. Their small monsters, the pilots, add their big monsters, the ships, to your hand, and can banish themselves at instant speed to allow the latter onto the field. When destroyed, the ships float back into the pilots. If nothing else, they're thematic. Unfortunately, the post-Nationals ban list was none too kind to them. Since then, they've faded entirely into obscurity. Even though cards like Dragonic Diagram could have pushed them over the edge, it turns out banishing your whole hand for mediocre combo setups isn't much better than playing pure. This is usually the part of the preview where I say until now, but they haven't actually got anything. I'm not advocating Cosmo as some sort of new deck or a meta breaker or anything like that. I'm advocating Cosmo as a deck I wish we hadn't forgotten about. There's a couple of reasons why it might be worth playing. It has incredible potential as a trap deck, and traps are kind of at an all-time power level. With so many dingus decks like Trickstar and Sky Striker running around, decks might just not be able to deal with a Dark Destroyer, and Dark Lady negates hand traps, which is something. In general, board states routinely end up incredibly simple these days, and when board states are simplified, the deck that gets to sit on an untargetable 3000 attack point monster seems pretty favored. We're playing a fair amount of Stun, the fabled 3 Torrential, which is an incredible boon to the deck, alongside cards like Skill Drain, the incredible Cosmojo, and Call of the Haunted over cards like Back to the Front, so we can both activate it to attack and artificially proc it on our own ship, floating into pilots from deck. So with that, let's get into the card by card. First, we've got the ships. We've got 1 Dark Destroyer, which pops monsters, 2 Forerunner, which gains life, 1 Landwalker, which protect, 1 Dogfighter, which makes tokens, 3 Slip Rider, which destroys spell and traps. After that are our pilots. We have 2 copies of Dark Lady, 1 Wicked Witch, 1 Farm Girl, 1 Sword Troopers, 2 Strawman, and 3 Tin Can. For spells, we've got 1 1-for-1, 1 Dark Hole, 3 Called by the Grave, so we don't have to play hand traps. That's how it works, right? 1 E-Telly, 3 Cosmotown, and 1 Stormforth. For traps, we've got 3 Torrential, 2 Cosmojo, 1 Skill Drain, 3 Call of the Haunted, and 3 Strike. In the extra, we've got 1 Cyber End Dragon for Nova Floating because Barbroid is like $200, 1 Mega Fleet for sideboarding, 1 Thunder Charger, 1 Cyber Dragon Infinity, 1 Greedy Samosara for Trickstar, I guess, 1 Volcasaurus, and 1 Sidra Nova. For links, we've got a Trisbania, a Nightmare Phoenix and a Nightmare Cerberus, Cleafor Genius, Hip Ho Shinnigan, Wee Witch, Underclock, and Linkaribo. So with that, let's jump into the games. Our first match is up against Dark Magician, and like it or hate it, Dark Magician is an archetype that does a very good job of setting for and passing. These types of decks are relatively easy for Cosmo to navigate because they can wipe away those set cards with their ETB effects. We get to go first, which is excellent. The first thing we're going to do is normal summon a copy of Cosmo Tin Can, then set 2, activate its effect in the end phase, find ourselves a copy of Forerunner, and pass it back to our opponent. We'll port out for a Dark Lady before they can activate any hand traps, going in blind. They'll go for an Apprentice Illusion Magician, whose effect will negate with Dark Lady. Afterwards, they're going to set a whole bunch of cards, including a Dark Magic Circle that they whiff on. We're going to activate Call of the Haunted to destroy one of these set cards before they can activate it, and we hit Eternal Soul. We're then going to activate Cosmo Dark Lady to port out into Forerunner and then destroy our entire board so we can use the Grave effect of both Slip Rider and Forerunner. Forerunner is going to get a Slip Rider so we can destroy that last pesky trap. Then we can use Strawman to bring back the Forerunner and start attacking. We'll get in for 2,800 points of damage, 500, 2,300, and then 1,500 off of Farm Girl, who can use her effect to add a copy of Dark Lady to the hand, who we will port out for and attack for an additional 22. Our second match is up against Barrier Statue Demise Stun, a deck that's always on the fringes of playability. If it could win the die roll every single time, boy, this thing would be unbeatable. Unfortunately, it has won the die roll against us. So we'll see how good Cosmos are when they can't special summon anything. The first thing our opponent is going to do is set 4 and activate Barrier Statue of the Heavens. That's really bad news for us because our hand is terrible. We're going to set a copy of Strawman. They're going to get our Cosmojo, of course, with a blind MST. They'll normal summon another Barrier Statue, and oh my goodness, a Raigeki and a Card of Demise. Well, we're not going to take damage at the very least, so we have some time to figure out how we're going to win this game. We'll set 1 and pass. Our opponent draws into an Upstart Goblin, which they will activate, finding a Mirror Force, setting it, and attacking for 1,000, and another 1,000 as well. We're down to 7, so we still have a little bit of time. We find a Cosmo Town, which is pretty good because we can shuffle these 3 cards back. We get a Dark Hole, and there's a Compulse on one of their monsters. So they'll be able to return that to the hand, but in the meantime, we can activate the effect of Cosmo Tin Can by getting it off of Emergency Teleport. We're then going to port out for a Slip Rider and destroy one of these set cards. It's Phantom Knight's Wing. They're going to go ahead and normal summon this copy of Barrier Statue one more time and pass it back to us. Things are looking pretty good for us because we have a Resolved Monster on our side of the board. We're going to add back the Tin Can, shuffle 2, and normal summon Farm Girl will attack, and oh boy, there's a Mirror Force. We'll go ahead and set 1 and pass it back to our opponent. They draw into another Card of Demise. My god. They find a Thunder King Ryo, will Torrential Tribute that board, and now they don't have a way to kill us despite the fact that we don't have a way to kill them. We'll shuffle back a whole bunch of monsters, normal summon a Tin Can, set a Skill Drain, and pass it back to our opponent. We find a Sword Trooper here, which is really good. It can at the very least attack. Our opponent's going to normal summon a Fossil Dynapachycephalo. We're going to go ahead and Skill Drain, and oh man, there's Dark Bribe. Okay, well, we get to draw a card, but we also take 1,200 points of damage. We draw into a Call of the Haunted, which does nothing with Fossil Dyna out. We're going to Torrential Tribute on our own monster, normal summoning this copy of Sword Trooper so we can get rid of this Fossil Dynapachycephalo. We'll pass it back, and another special summon stopper. Stop already! We don't have a lot of removal left in our deck. We only have a 1-for-1 and a Tin Can in our hand. We'll shuffle it back to set 1 card face down. Our opponent draws a Pot of Duality. They will activate it, and what did they find but a couple of Phantom Knight's Wings and a copy of Storming. They'll get the wing and then pass it back to us, taking us down to 1,700. We draw, and what do we find but a Drag Down to the Grave. That actually does do something because, of course, there is a Barrier Statue of the Heavens in the graveyard. We'll negate the effect of the onboard one for that reason. We're going to call the Haunted back to Slip Rider. They'll Solemn Strike it. We'll then use Slip Rider's effect to get Strawman, then use Strawman's effect to get back Slip Rider, use Slip Rider's effect to destroy another one. Of course, it is negated. Then Cosmojo, the remaining monster on their side of the board, go into a Tin Can, then use Cosmo Town to return Slip Rider, port out for Slip Rider one more time, and destroy another set card before attacking directly. It gets Mirror Forced, of course, but we do have a Tin Can, and we do have the life points remaining to activate it. Unfortunately, we do not have the monsters in deck. Our opponent's going to activate Pot of Duality, and what do they find but an MST? That's not bad news. They're going to hit one of our set cards, but it's not like we were going to activate Solemn Strike with 700 life points. We're going to go ahead and add back Slip Rider to our hand, going to 200, then destroy one of their set cards. They're going to activate Compulse. That's going to return it to our hand, but I have no problem just passing with this board. I don't think they can out my Strawman. They're going to normal summon a copy of Fossil Dynapachycephalo, then pass it back. We're going to activate the Monarch Stormforth to get rid of that for Slip Rider, destroying one of their set cards, then attack for 0 once again. There's another Storming Mirror Force. We can destroy the last one by banishing our copy of Cosmo Strawman and passing it back to our opponent. They draw an MST. They're going to go ahead and hit our set card. We're going to banish a Thunder King Ryo in response, and we're pretty close to actually winning this game that our opponent drew 3 Card of Demises during. We're going to go down to 100 to get this copy of Tin Can back in our hand, banish it for Dark Lady, and finally get in for 23 and 2,200 points of damage. So it's time for Game 3, and you know what that means, a best of 3 versus meta. Our opponent's on Goki. Alright, well, okay, it's not ideal, but at the very least we're going first, which means we're not going to get U-linked. We are playing a lot of traps, and it's possible we can chew through with things like Torrential Tribute. Let's see how it turns out. The first thing we're going to do is Cosmo Town for 3, and what do we find but, a couple of traps. We'll set them. We don't find a Tin Can, which is unfortunate, so we'll pass it back to our opponent. They'll go for the Super Agent. They miss, so they'll normal summon this copy of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit to go into Invoker. That's a pretty good time to Torrential. They'll pass it back to us. We find a copy of 1-for-1. That does make Tin Can, so we'll go into him. Unfortunately, our opponent has Effect Veiler, so we'll go into the end phase and use the effect anyway to establish dominance. Our opponent draws into an Ash Blossom. They'll go for the Super Agent one more time, and they whiff. They're going to normal summon a Suprex, and I don't want to, but I probably have to cause Mojo here. It also prevents a Suprex activation, which is fine. We draw into, oh come on, a third Cosmo Town in the top 8 cards of my deck. Well, it happens. Our opponent draws into a Monster Reborn, so they'll normal summon the Super Agent, get back this junk forward, go into Isolde, then use Isolde's effect, to add another Super Agent to hand and summon an Octo Stretch from deck. They'll then go into a Summon Sorceress. This Octo Stretch is going to add a copy of Rematch to their hand. That Summon Sorc is going to put an Ash Blossom on my side of the board. Then they'll bring back this copy of Octo Stretch, get a Headbat from their deck, go into Cerberus, destroying the copy of Ash Blossom that they just put on our side of the board, and then triggering the effect of Headbat. Now they have Fuel for Rematch, so they'll go ahead and fire that off, and oh god, I mean, as soon as Firewall comes out, it's pretty clear you don't need to see the rest of this. So it's time for game 2, and our hand this time looks a lot better. We have access to both Tin Can and some things that protect it, a pilot we can port out into, a Cosmojo, and a Called by the Grave. Called by the Grave is in a weird space in this deck. You both want to keep it in your hand during end phase so you can ensure your Tin Can resolves, and also set it so you're protected next turn. Unfortunately, we make the wrong call here. We're going to start by activating 1-for-1 to get ourselves a Tin Can from deck by discarding a Dark Lady, set a Cosmojo, and activate its effect. They're going to activate Infinite Transience, which of course you cannot Call by the Grave, so we'll go into Dark Lady instead so that it can resolve and get into a Forerunner. Our opponent's going to start by normal summoning a copy of Marauding Captain. Using its effect, we'll negate it with Dark Lady. That's going to get Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbited, so we will port out for a copy of Forerunner. That resolves, and then they'll pass it back to us. So things are looking pretty good. We might be able to win here. We're going to use Forerunner's effect to gain 1,000 life points. We'll get in for 2,800, then we'll activate Cosmojo, banishing one of our opponent's cards from the graveyard to go into a Farm Girl. Farm Girl's going to attack directly for 1,500, then pay 500 to add a copy of Wicked Witch to the hand. We're going to do that, then attack for 1,900, and this Dogfighter should clinch us the game, except Octostretch is also a hand trap, and it activates during the damage step, so we can't activate Called by the Grave. We get a token, and they draw in a rematch. They're going to use Suprex for Suprex, go into Isolde, then use Isolde's effect, trying to trigger a Suprex as well. We will go ahead and Called by the Grave one of those two, probably a little early on the draw there. They're going to go into a copy of Octostretch, then link into a Summon Sorceress. Octostretch is going to trigger, getting a Suprex to hand. They'll then Goki rematch for a couple of Goki from graveyard with different names. Summon Sorceress is going to get a Twist Cobra from deck. They'll go into a Unicorn, so they can shuffle back this copy of Dogfighter, because of course destroying it would cause it to float. Then they will get Phoenix Blade back to the hand and pass it back, because our guy has too big a butt. We draw into Called by the Grave, and unfortunately that looks like it's going to be the end of the game. They draw into a Monster Reborn. They're going to activate the effect of Goki Suprex to go into Phoenix to destroy our set card, leaving nothing up to chance. Trigger the grave effects of both Headbat and Suprex. We're going to Call by the Grave one of those suckers, but unfortunately they get the other one. They can then, of course, try for the Spiral Super Agent, use Phoenix Blade's effect, then activate Monster Reborn to get back our Dark Destroyer, because it doesn't care where it's being special summoned from. It can destroy our token, and then they can get in for lethal damage. So that's that. I think it's a little bit unfortunate that Monarch still gets lip service and BA is an actual meta deck. Maybe this is a little bit of justice for Cosmo. If you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm on twitch.tv/MonoBlueTron every weekend, and if you have a certain idea for a deck or archetype you want me to take a look at on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comment section below and I'll do my best. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.